I'm Harold Bernstein. I was born in Council Bluffs, Iowa on February 21st, 1921. My dad was Louis Bernstein. He was born in 1887, and he was born in Poland, someplace I don't know where, and he came to this country when his first 2 or 3 years of life, and he was brought up in Omaha, and he went to long grade school. He used to talk about, and he was sold newspapers and shine shoes on the streets of Omaha, and literally grew up in Omaha along with his brothers, and his sisters were older, and one of them was quite a bit older and had already married later on. And my grandfather died in 1899. He was buried out at Fisher Farm Cemetery, and my dad grew up the hard way, and he did various jobs, and in 1907 he, along with his brother Mose, they started in business at the People's Store along with his future brother-in-laws, the Krasnys, and they'd bought out a store that had been called the People's Store, that had been in Council Bluffs from another family from years before, and it apparently had gone broke back around the turn of the century. And through the years they built their store into one of the leading stores in Council Bluffs, if not the leading department store, along with my uncles, the Krasnys, my mother's brothers, and my dad and his brother. My dad and his brother originally operated the grocery department in this store, and the various other brothers, the Krasny brothers, had settled in Fullerton, Nebraska, and that's where my mother had come from. Her mother had died in childbirth, and an older sister, who was her sister Dora, more or less raised her, and they came to this country. My mother was about a year or so old, and never knew her mother. And I don't know how they happened to end up in Fullerton, but her brothers were merchants in Fullerton, and her brother Jake, who they moved to Council Bluffs and was in this People's Store, and Uncle Jake more or less took my mother in as she got older. We have a family history that my sister Shirley Kolakowski and cousin Tham Friedman spent a couple years on, and one of the interesting things in this book is showing the census of Fullerton, Nebraska in the year 1900, and showing my mother's and her brothers in this particular census, showing my mother, I think, is going to grade school at the time in Fullerton. And eventually they were in other small towns in Nebraska. So one of the brothers was in Pierce and different ones, but basically they came from Fullerton to Council Bluffs, and one at a time the brothers all settled in the People's Store. And as the years went by, my dad and my mother got married in Council Bluffs in 1913, and my sister Ray was born in 1914, and she was married to Ed Brodke, originally from the State Furniture Company, and later they owned the Ames Bank. And my sister Pauline was born 2 years later, and she was 5 years older than me, and she married Herman Friedman, and she had 2 children, Judy and Richard. And my sister Ray had two children, Susie and Peter. And my younger sister, Shirley, was married to Artie Kolakowski, originally at Central Market and then later at Exarban Beef. And Shirley's been a widow for several years, and she has two boys, Robbie and Marty. And I grew up in Council Bluffs, and I went to Pierce School, grade school. Was very active in outdoor activities. I love sports. I think I thought I was better than I was, but I played basketball, and I played baseball, and I played football in Sandlot or neighborhoods, and loved all those sports and still do. And when I was in the 8th grade, we won the city championship in 8th grade basketball, but I never did play in high school, and played football for 2 years, but I wasn't big enough, and I gave up and was maybe sorry about it. Anyway, went to through Pierce through 8 years in 8 grades, and went to Bloomer Junior High for a year. That was 1 year, and the way the system worked, the 9th grade, and then I graduated from Abraham Lincoln High School in 1939. Growing up in Council Bluffs was during the Depression years. I used to hang around to the store a lot. My dad finally was in the hardware business, housewares, sporting goods, that type of hard lines business, in the People's Department store, where my uncles had the clothing and other departments. My dad had sold out the grocery department to Sam and Herman Meyerson back around 1924, and they operated the grocery department in the People's store for a number of years. They split in the 1930s, and Herman was the successor and kept that along with his son-in-law, Leon Franco, for a number of years, and then sometime in around late 50s or early 60s, the Meyersons sold out the grocery department, and but our store flourished during that period. Going back again to my high school days, I hung out at the store a lot. I worked on Saturday, so I literally grew up in the store. I was very close to my dad. He would take me to baseball games. Council Bluffs was a hot town for semi-pro baseball back in the 1930s, and they had a tournament, the Southwestern Iowa baseball tournament, and it was a big deal for Council Bluffs back then, and I followed it, and we'd go on Sunday afternoons to baseball games, and I hung around with my dad a great deal. I mean, it just he took me to the store, and in Council Bluffs after school you could walk down to downtown, and it was just in a smaller town atmosphere where it isn't like it is today, where people live in suburban areas, or you have to have a car and so forth. So if I would ride my bike downtown, I would could ride back home, or I would ride maybe walk from school and go down. When I was probably 10 years old or 9 years old, I went to Hebrew school in Council Bluffs at the synagogue, and I was bar mitzvahed there when I was 13, and the synagogue was, we were members of Temple Israel in Omaha, the Reformed Temple, and I went to Sunday school in a temple, and we were not particularly religious Jews, and I shouldn't say religious. We certainly observed everything, but I was not brought up in a very religious home as far as keeping kosher or as far as certain other things. Living in Council Bluffs, we certainly knew what all that was, and I remember the Sunday afternoons of going to North 24th Street and getting corned beef and rye bread and so forth as a kid growing up. But Council Bluffs was a little bit different, and my dad was not a particularly, he wasn't schooled well into Judaism because of the way he grew up in Omaha, and his father had died. When I say schooled in it, we didn't have the background of some of the people that spent more time around their religious life. Although we certainly observed all of our religion, and we certainly went to services and so forth. Didn't mean to get into religion here. I just was explaining who I am. And stop. Okay. When I was growing up, my folks had built a home in about 1924, and we lived in that home for 20-some years. What it is today, I thought it was a lifetime when they sold their home in about 1945, and I look back and they'd only owned it for 21 years, and we've lived in this house, Millie and I have, since for 30 years at this time, and it seems like I still think of it as the new house. But when you're a kid, why, that's the way it is. I was, as I said before, I spent a lot of time outside, and I was always playing. During the certain seasons of whatever it was, I was interested in that, and I was interested in going to get into the games, and as I said, I thought I was probably a better athlete, but I never developed into a great athlete, unfortunately. I wasn't very big, and I didn't do as well as I would have liked to have done. But as I said earlier, I hung around the store a lot, and so I was very close to my dad and close to my parents, and we had a very close family. My mother, her brothers, and because we were all in this store together, we were very, very close. There wasn't a day growing up that I didn't see my uncles either at the store, and then there was the days before television, and we didn't live, none of us lived too far apart in the neighborhood, and we'd drop in on each other in the evening. We would see each other all the time. I mean, it was not unusual for my uncles and aunts to come over for an evening or for an hour or whatever it was, and we'd go out for rides or out in the country to certain routes that we took to Crescent, Iowa, and that was the old Lincoln Highway for about 7 miles, and then another route we'd take go out on different ways during the summer months, and it was often with my Uncle Mose Bernstein, who was my dad's brother, of course, and but my mother's uncles would also come over all in the evenings, and my parents' social life was a lot with their family and other people in Council Bluffs that they were friends with, and they were card players. My mother was a card player. They played mahjong in the afternoon or poker in the afternoon, and they played poker in the evening, and it was a nice life. My dad was a very active person in the community. He was active both in the Jewish community through B'nai B'rith, and he had been one of the founders of the Council Bluffs B'nai B'rith lodges back when he was just a young man of around 21 years old and 22 years old, and so through the years he had been very active in that, and the Council Bluffs had 125 to 150 Jewish families during these years of the 1920s and 30s and 40s. And my dad was also quite active in the non-Jewish Council Bluffs world. I mean, I say not the world, but he was active in the business community, and I learned a lot of through hanging around with him, and we would go. He had a lot of farmer friends, and we would go visit farms on a lot. And when I was growing up, he'd be invited to farmers' weddings. I remember going to their receptions when I was in high school with my dad. Sometime my mother would go, but mainly my dad would go, and he would be the one that was the business connection, and I would go with him. And in high school, I got by. I wasn't a great student. I worked, when I say got by, a little better than getting by, but I didn't have a whole lot of interest, which I was always sorry about. And I was not particularly active in high school with activities, other than we had junior ROTC, and I was active in that. But other than that, I didn't get into debate or any particular thing, and mostly a social life with friends of messing around, as we would say. And Council Bluffs was, being a Jewish, I had mostly Gentile friends. They either kids that I grew up with through grade school, and to this day, why, there's several of them that are still my close friends, although we don't see a lot of each other. Why, we might exchange holiday cards or birthday cards yet, and each year there's one more seems to die, but I still have quite a few friends left from those days. I've gone to several class reunions up through my 50th class reunion, and my high school, we still have a reunion about every year, of just not a small, but just a little get-together, which I don't attend to it. They keep calling me in, and I see some of them, and they say, why don't you come to our dinner that we're going to have? And that would be already now 61 years ago, which is a long time ago. But each year, why, the class is there's less and less. At the time, we had 400 graduating in our class, which was the largest class that Abraham Lincoln ever had at the time in 1939. I knew a lot of people in Council Bluffs growing up because of working at the store and hanging around the store, and that gave me a different type of a background than a lot of my friends in Omaha had. I hear them talking about their life at the JCC and how they played there and hung out every day there, and we had a different hanging out. And when I graduated from high school, I was going to go to Nebraska. That was where I always decided I was going to go. I went there because I thought that I was going to be in this community and the best, and that I would want to know the people around here. My brother-in-law, Eddie Brodkey, was, I kind of always looked up to him because he's a few years older than me, and he'd taken my sister out for so many years, and he'd gone to Nebraska, and he was a ZBT, and that was what I wanted to be. And and I was set to go there, and it would have been either there or Iowa, and I decided that Nebraska was the place for me, and was the best decision I ever made because of the way it influenced my whole life after that. Back in high school days, Hitler had come into being right in the 30s, and German refugees, as we called them back in those days, started to come into the United States. And because of my dad's interest in the community and because of knowing lots of people, my dad was quite active in the state of Iowa of helping with the early German immigrants, a few of them. And we had those come to Council Bluffs. And when they would come to Council Bluffs, my dad would along with another couple people, they would take these guys in. We brought them to our house, and we put them up into places, got them jobs. And I'm talking about 2 or maybe 3 men that I can think of that this happened to. This was before the war, and these were people that I never saw them after the war, never saw them after they left Council Bluffs. But when they first came, I remember Dad, we'd take them to a baseball game, and my dad would sit there and explain what the baseball game was. But these were educated people who were out of Germany very early. One gentleman in particular was from Essen, and they could all speak English, and this was just a small way in Council Bluffs and in Iowa, and throughout Iowa, Dad would go to meetings in Des Moines and committee meetings, and this was early on. Never did any of this much after the war. He helped with some of the later people that Council Bluffs brought in through the Federation. We had our own federation in Council Bluffs, separate from Omaha's, and I was active in that through the years. After I graduated high school, I went back. I meant to say I started to tell you about the Depression days, and in high school, and it was not only did we have the Depression back then, but we had drought, and the drought was terrible, and that through the early mid-30s, the corn crops would get burned up, and we would suffer right with the farmers because they didn't have any money to buy anything with, and when they didn't have anything to buy anything with, they couldn't come to trade with us, and so things were hard up through the 30s, but everybody got through them, and the Depression was right with us at the same time, and and then when it was not until the war started in the war started September 1st when Hitler invaded Poland, September 1st of 1939, and about a week before I went away to college, and of course we didn't get into it for a couple more years, but the war, it took the war to get over the Depression in this area. I mean, that's when it finally broke. Things were very tight in 1939, 40, and early 41. But then when the summer of 42, when they build a bomber plant in Omaha, and then anybody could swing a hammer, could get a job, and things from that time on. And it's hard for people today to conceive of what the Depression was and how life was back then. And again, it hit all of us. It didn't hit my family as hard as, of course, it hit a lot of other people. but everybody knew what the Depression was. My high school days were fun days to a large extent. I had, as I said, mostly we were Gentile friends. I belonged to, there was a local AZA chapter in Council Bluffs, which I belonged to, and I had good friends in Council Bluffs. Weren't real close to a lot of them, but guys that are still friends that we grew up, Yale Gottsteiner and Bob Passer, they went to TJ, but early on they had gone to Hebrew school and I knew them through that. Irv Cohn, who became my very best friend, he and I graduated the same year, but we weren't that close at high school, although we were friends. And then when we went to school, we became the closest of friends. And many other fellows. The Udelsons lived next door to us. That would have been Bob Udelson and his brother Floyd. They had and Milt and was already gone. He was older, and Coleman was gone. He was older. That was his older brothers. Just mentioned them. They were our next door neighbors. And another family that was very right next to us was Scharf's, and that's Marion Bookie. She lives in Omaha today. She's 90-some years old, and that was her parents, and they owned a corner grocery store that we used to do some trading at, and it gets back to our closeness then of the family of my uncles and aunts that we saw of, and I just happened to mention some of these other guys that I grew up with. Ben Cutler was another fellow that I grew up with, and we were friends. He was ahead of me in school a year or so, and his brother Sal was a little younger. And Fox, Harold Fox, I went to high school with him. That's how few Jewish people really were at AL and in high school that I can still remember these fellows, even though we didn't go out in the evenings and mess around that much. We were all friends. Another guy that I liked very much, he moved away when we graduated high school, and I've never heard from him since, was a fellow named Harvey Epstein. He moved to California, and I never did see him. When I was in high school, I went to a Temple Israel youth. It wasn't like Nifty, it's similar to it, but we'd have, and I met two guys that I was very friendly with for a couple of years. They were a year ahead of me. I was a junior and they were seniors, but for a couple of years we were very close friends, and one of them was Lawrence Klein, another one was Ralph Rubenstein. And Lawrence Klein eventually won a Nobel Prize for economics. I wasn't as smart as he was, but he moved to California, and I've seen him a few times through the years, but he was a cousin to Betty Lazar, Phil Lazar's wife. And Ralph lives in Texas, and I've seen him a couple of times, and his parents passed away, but I lost track of him. They were a couple of good friends of mine before going to college. So I used to hang out on weekends, some with these fellows, and yeah, we were talking about the Depression earlier, and one of the things that differentiates between the Depression days and a recession that we've had in the last few years. In the Depression days, everybody felt it. I suppose that there were a lot of rich people that I don't know about someplace, but everybody felt the Depression. I mean, it did hit everybody, and there didn't seem to be, at least my age, I didn't realize it, and even looking back and reflecting on it, it doesn't seem like there was that difference of different people at different levels, because rich people who lived in beautiful big homes and so forth, they felt the Depression. I mean, it had to have hit everybody, and today the people that lose their jobs and there's still so much money around, but in the Depression days there just didn't seem to be the money around for people. And then when President Roosevelt got elected, he brought in the programs of like WPA and other social programs that this country had never heard of, but it did a lot of good. A lot of Republicans, and in Constabulus in particular, I mean, the Constabulus Nonpareil was, they would, hear my dad talk about how they say, we don't want any of that Democratic money. I mean, it was a strong Republican paper, and they didn't want to take the charity from the Democratic Party and so forth, which was certainly wrong, because we did get, I remember one grade school, I know the WPA had in Constabulus, they did build that, and they did some other good work there of taking the, doing some paving, and it was the only thing to save the country, to give these people jobs, and guys would have to drop out of high school, and they joined what they called the CCC. That was the conservative something, I don't know, but these guys was not like the Army, but they went to camps like the Army, and they did have uniforms. They could quit, but it would help them and get through, and they'd get some money for their parents, and they would do certain things, the social work today, not individual social work, but things like building roads, or not necessarily roads, forest work. I mean, they did different things, and because there were no jobs to be had. There were just no jobs. I mean, you got 25 cents an hour at those days were good. And I don't mean to say that I was affected by that. I'm just talking about the times that this was. I mean, that was beyond me. I mean, I was fortunate that I was not part of this. But I'm talking about that these were times that were very, very, very hard. My dad, when they repealed the 18th Amendment, which was prohibition, and they repealed that in 1933, and my dad he applied for beer distributorship. Iowa was going to get 3.2 beer. Nebraska didn't have it yet, but Iowa repealed it immediately in 33 or in 34, and my dad and his brother, and then the two Meyersons, they were in the store. They formed the Iowa Distributing Company, and my dad spent a lot of time away from the store and worked at that. And they had the early Pabst Blue Ribbon, which was one of the three leading brands at the time, along with Schlitz and along with Budweiser. And they had the distributorship, and I was about 12 or 13 at the time, and I would hang around there somewhat too, so I had a little bit of a early introduction to the beer distributing business. My dad was spending too much time there. They had a manager there, and then Ben Gershon, who was a relative of my mother's, and he was wanted to come in from Schuyler, Nebraska. And he came in, and he was, my dad arranged for him to buy out the Meyersons, so he would he ran the distributing company. And then within about 3 years, he told my dad that he says if there isn't enough for all of you, and if you're not active in it, why, he would like to buy him out. And so my dad had to make a choice of whether he really wanted to stay in that type of business or wanted to continue there. And my uncle told him, he says I need you, we need you at the store, and we have to decide what we want to do. So he decided to sell the whole distributing business, and that was right maybe before the World War II, and when things really started booming in that. But anyway, he eventually sold that distributing business in the late 30s sometime to Ben Gershon. And we were very, very close with Ben also. And that would be Shirley Goldstein's parents. Ben was Shirley Goldstein's parents. And in high school, there was I ran into anti-Semitism. People didn't know what Jewish were. When I say somewhat, and there was always that, always there. We always knew we were a little bit different. I mean, we certainly that, and I mean that was different, but it was okay. We had nothing to. Our neighbors were Gentile people, but it was not the. Today there wasn't the Enlightenment in the non-Jewish world, I don't think, as there is today. I mean, there was, and then when Hitler came and made people aware of Jews even more, why there was a feeling of that we weren't quite. Let's say that I just never never called a Gentile girl in high school for a date to take her out. Although I was invited to parties, and I would go to parties with them, and I was one of the people, one of the guys. I mean, it was okay, but I spoke earlier of finding a couple guys in Omaha that I would finally found good friends of Jewish guys and I knew that eventually that when I was going to go to Nebraska that I was going to join a Jewish fraternity because there was no other choice, and that was it. And I wanted to go to Nebraska, and that is exactly what I did. And Irv Cohn went with me, and I literally talked him into going to Nebraska. He was going to Iowa, and gave him a good pitch on why we should be going there. And so we spent a lot of time that summer of when we graduated of going to high school before we went to Lincoln. So we pledged, and we moved into 1515 L Street while they were building a new fraternity house on the corner of 14th and R. And at Christmas vacation time, we moved into our new fraternity house, and we had about 14 pledge brothers, and Stuart Simon, Irv Malishak, and Irv Cohn, Bernie Altsler, Cal Menzer, Norman Smirren, and we all stayed as good friends through the years. And today, Norman Smirren and Stuart Simon, and I see them all the time. We're very close friends yet, and the other guys who live out of town, we still keep in contact, and then we're good friends of the guys that were ahead of us a year or two, and good friends of the guys that were behind us a year or two, like I mentioned, Gottsteiner and a few of us. There's a few guys that are gone every year, and but we continue to have fun when we see each other, the ones that are still around, and we count our blessings and how lucky we are. In fact, we meet once a month. The guys in the fraternity that were there of the various classes, whoever shows up on the first Tuesday of the month. Tomorrow is the first Tuesday of the month, and we're going to be having lunch tomorrow of whoever shows up. And we'll have guys that all the way from about 85 years old down to about 79 years old. And anybody else would be welcome that from later years, but anyway, this is the group. I know that every other group has the same relationship with their friends, but this was a big influence on my life. I mean, it was it's the relationship that's stayed with me and all of the guys that I'm talking about through the years that we our social life and who we do always go back to. In school, I went there in 1939, and we had a lot of fun. I dated no one in particular. We have come home. I would come home quite a few weekends and to work in the store, help my dad, and that was another selling point of why I wanted to go to Lincoln, is because I could do that. And today that sounds like a foolish reason to be going to school someplace, but anyway, back then it was. And most of the guys, a lot of guys did come home. A lot of the guys did come home on weekends. And we stop. Okay, when we went to school in 1939, the fraternity house was being remodeled. It actually was completely redone. They rather than tear it down, they built an extra story on it and did a complete job on it. And we rented a house over on 15th and L near the state capitol, so it's quite a ways to go to school. So I went to school in the first week in September, and I was walking. It was the campus was over on quite a few blocks away from where we were living. And I walked by, I think it was Seidel's Buick at the time, and I looked in there, and I just a whim, I just thought, I've got to get myself a car. And I walked in there and I bought a 1931 Model A Roadster, Ford Model A Roadster for $25. And this was a Thursday. And I just, on a whim, and I know $25 sounds cheap, but that's what I bought it for. That's what they were. And that car, it was, today, of course, that would be worth a lot of money, but back then. So I took it, and it didn't run real good. And that weekend, I went home, and I didn't tell my dad about it, but I told my brother-in-law Eddie about it, Eddie Broadkey. He says, "You get rid of that thing right now." And he didn't. And he says, "Your dad is would not approve of that one bit." And so he's told me. And so I went back and I sold that car to some of the upperclassmen, and they immediately traded it on another car. And they used to. That was another like a sedan, and then we'd get rides back and forth. I'm sure they must have charged us a nickel or so to get a ride, but whatever it was, to get it to the campus. But that was my experience on owning my first car, and that's how I listened to my brother-in-law. He says that you better get rid of that. And I never did tell my dad, and he found out about it a few years later, and he says, "I didn't know that." He says, "I would have been very unhappy with you for doing that without him approving it." Anyway, although he was always very liberal with me with a car. I always had a car to drive, but none of my, I just was there. All I had to do was just go out and take it. It was mine to use. I'm talking about when I was in high school. And I had been driving since I was 15, because back in those days you could get a license in Iowa when you were 15 years old. And so from the day I got my driver's license, my dad was, the car was mine to drive whenever I would feel like going someplace. So anyway, we would struggle back and forth to class, because we were quite a ways away, and this day and age nobody would think of walking that far, I don't suppose, but the freshmen, the pledges, we had wake-up duty, and when the winter, when it started to get colder in November or maybe late October, we had to start a fire in the furnace. And my dad natural gas came to Council Bluffs very early, going back to my youth. And we had one of the first natural gas furnaces in Council Bluffs around 1930 or so. And we didn't, in fact, when we built the house, they had a nice sized coal bin, and my dad put a basketball goal in that basement for us and changed that coal bin and painted it. And the nice room, and all the kids in the neighborhood used to come over there, and we'd play basketball, even though the ceiling was was not very high. We would mess around in that basement with one basket during the winter months. But so I was so worried that I wouldn't be able to get that fire started. I just used to, when my turn came to start that fire, when that thing finally went, I was really happy. And we had a terrible time waking up some of those guys. Ernie Wintrobe, he was an upperclassman at the time, and man, we just couldn't get him out of bed. And so we finally, at Christmas time, we moved into the new house, the new fraternity house. Oh, we were so proud of this house. And Bob Kuhn, he was our pledge master. He was the vice president. He was a pledge master. He was a senior engineering student. And he made me his assistant house manager, because I had the background of the hardware business and so forth, and knew some of that stuff according to him. And he picked me, and he wanted me to be the assistant house manager. So I was his assistant, and the assistant got to do most of the work. Anyway, we had a great time there, and I know that the dorms, the first year of the dorms was, they didn't have any heat in them. They thought that was going to be healthy. The dorms were on the second and third floor, and it was just terrible. It was so cold up there, you just couldn't hardly stand it during those winter months. And it was just another experience. I mean, you had blankets and so forth, and even though you were 18 or 19 years old at the time, why it was very, very cold. But they thought this was healthy. I think that eventually they did put heat in those dorms. They found out that wasn't quite the right way. During my freshman year, Nebraska was going to play down in Columbia, Missouri, and I decided that that would be a great trip to take when we played Missouri. And so I was able to, told my dad, and he let us take the car with several of the guys, and so we drove down to Columbia. So that was my first experience of going to an out-of-town football game, and I think that they beat us that year. They had a great team, and they had All-American quarterback, and I can't think of his name. I knew it very well at the time. He was very, very good. But anyway, they beat us, and we had a good football team all through the 30s. Nebraska was, when I was growing up, one of my biggest treats was being able to go to a Nebraska football game from the time I was probably 10 or 12 years old on. If I could go to a Nebraska football game once a year, that was a big treat. Again, my brother-in-law Eddie was down in Lincoln, and I would go with him. He wasn't my brother-in-law at the time, but I would, wherever I could get a ride or so to go, I would go. And Nebraska had great football teams. It was the Big Six Conference back then, and they were always a leader. And then Oklahoma came along, but they were always tough games. They were great games. I know that in 1938, when I was a senior in high school, my dad took me to the Nebraska-Pittsburgh game, and they had a Jewish All-American, and Pittsburgh did, and we wanted to see him play. And in those days, Pittsburgh handled Nebraska pretty well, even though Nebraska would play Minnesota, who was always a great team back in the 30s. But Nebraska did very well until World War II, and then they fell apart for another few years until the Vanny game. But I was always a Nebraska football fan, except when they played Iowa. And back then they did play Iowa, and I used to root for Iowa back in those late 30s, or whenever they would play Iowa. And then when we went to Lincoln, when I went to Nebraska, I should say, we had to wear these little red freshman caps until the homecoming, and then on homecoming, we could take those off. I had a lot of fun as a pledge. It was a great experience. One time, one fun night we had was right before we got initiated. Was the Nebraska State basketball tournament was on, and I was determined to go to a game on a Friday night and see a high school game. And those guys, we had done something wrong, and they weren't going to let, and I was one of them. I can't remember what I had done, but I was being punished, and I wasn't supposed to leave the fraternity house that night. So I was determined that I was going to leave the fraternity house, and I got a piece of, somebody had a fur tail in the hanging in the room. I don't know why they did, but anyway, I made up my bed in this dorm, and I put this sticking out. Back in those days, I had hair, and I fooled them. I left and I went to this game, but somehow or other they caught me, and they kept us up in the whole freshman class, and they had more fun with us that night when I got there of quizzing all of us. They quizzed all the other guys of what they were going to do, what they should do to me for pulling this trick. And anyway, it was just another one of those crazy experiences. Anyway, and then my sophomore year, life went on, and then when let's see, that would have been following year. We just went to school, and Irv Cohn became one of my closest friends. Irv Cohn, he and I in 1942. I was trying to get into the Navy right after the war started. everybody was looking for the best place to get into the service, and I was trying to get into the Navy Reserves. And then they were going to let you go to school that semester, and then I had a cyst, and this thing bothered me for a while, and I couldn't pass the physical because finally he and Herb and I went into the Air Force, took the cadet exam, and he eventually became a pilot and got killed in World War II. And I I had some problems with the same cyst when I went into the service and didn't get to go through the classification center and didn't make it through there, and I became an aircraft armorer. My Air Force for 3 years was very uneventful, and I didn't accomplish very much in the service. A lot of experiences, and it was changed everybody's life, of course. I met Millie when I was home one time, and she had a date with a fraternity brother, Mike Rubinitz, who was in med school at the time. And I met him I met Millie at Eddie Malashok's. Eddie and Sally had just gotten married, and I met Millie. She was with Mike that night, and at some party. And then after the war, when I went back to Lincoln for a semester and graduated, Millie was in Lincoln, and that would have been in 1946. And after the war, I went back for a semester, and Sid Schwartz and Joe Kirschenbaum, and so went back, and so we got out right at the time, so we were able to finish school that semester. Millie was still there, and then that following fall, I used to go down to Lincoln to see her, and a couple times a week, and maybe on a weekend if she'd either come to Omaha or I'd go down there. But I guess I talked her out of leaving school there in the following spring, and we got married in March of 1947. And so we've been married for right now as of 56 years. During the World War II, I spent time in Denver and made a lot of civilian friends there, and spent time in the desert in California, and didn't do much of anything other than put in my time. And when I got out of the service, it would have been in the 1st of February of 1946, and just in time to go back to finish the last semester of school. And the first week or so there, I saw Millie on the campus one day, and we were going to have a party within a week or two, and I remember asking her if she'd like to go with me, and yes. In fact, I had seen Millie. I had met her, as I mentioned, when I was home on furlough one time. And then I was stationed, the last 2 months of service, I was stationed out at Harvard, Nebraska, which was not far from Hastings. And Millie was in school, and I would go through Lincoln, and I took Millie out a couple times. I don't think she even knew who I was the first time I called her after I told her that I had met her, but apparently she impressed me that night. And so she So I took her out in Lincoln 2 or 3 times. Then when I went back to school, she was surprised to see me, I think, because then I started taking her out that spring, and I finished then in May, and continued to see her whenever we could in the summer, and she would come in every now and then, and then in the fall, as I said, I went back. I would go down and see her, and then decided that it was time for me to get married, and wanted to marry Millie, and so we talked it over, and so we got married in March then of 1947, and she left school, which today people wouldn't do, and I was probably wrong to talk her into doing that at the time. She was a junior, and I had already established myself in the store after finishing school, and my uncle had moved to California in the meantime. During World War II, his health was failing. My dad's brother Mose and partner, and I used to see them in California. In fact, I stayed with them when I was stationed out there. About once a month I would get into L.A. And he died that spring. My uncle died in the spring of 47. Pardon me, I think the spring of 46, when I was still in school. And then, but he had already left the store and sold out his interest to my dad and to me, even though I wasn't there yet. And that was an opportunity for me to go into the family business, although I had been stationed in Denver and thought that would have been a great place for me to settle. I just didn't even think about it later on, that Dad and we had decided that I would just go into the business. He needed me more or less, and things were booming, and it would have been very foolish for me probably to pass that up. So it's a move that I have never regretted. And although Millie, we moved to Council Bluffs, and we immediately bought a home before we were even married. Homes were very hard, apartments were hard to find, but we found a very nice home, and we bought that home and settled in Council Bluffs, and I became active in various Chamber of Commerce activities and Council Bluffs activities through the years, and we led a life in Council Bluffs, social life in Council Bluffs, and also our social life in Omaha. It was we'd have to do a lot of running, and people would come to Council Bluffs to see us, but our friends were guys that I went to school with, and some of Millie's friends, but mainly the people that I knew. And even though they were a little bit, their wives were already a little bit older than Millie, she fit right in, and became a good friend of many of them. And Marion Schlossberg, Bus Schlossberg's wife, she was from Chicago, and she was a newcomer to Omaha also, and so she and Millie became very good friends. And we were very good friends with Betty Lee. Betty was Herb Cohn's sister, who had been my best friend and got killed during the war. And Betty and Cy, we built a new home on Kenmore in 1952, and Betty and Cy built one right next door to us within a year, right at the same time practically. And they had 3 kids, and their daughter Judy and our daughter Kay Kay was a year older. Kay was born on December the 3rd, 1949. And Judy is a year younger, and they became the closest of friends. And then they had another younger daughter, a year or so younger, was Patty, who Kay eventually became Kay's very good best friend, and also before they were married, and they lived together in an apartment for a short time. But we saw a lot of Betty and Cy, and they eventually split many years later, and both of them are now deceased. And Betty eventually married Buddy Studna, who was also a fraternity and pledge brother of mine, and we renewed acquaintances and became very good friends while Betty was married to Buddy. Through the years in Council Bluffs, I was active in the business world, and was rewarded by having a good relationship with the community, and was asked to be on a bank board, and also on a savings and loan board. My dad had been on First Federal Savings and Loan, and when he got sick and was not able to return, he was about 80 at the time. They asked me to take his place, and so I was on that board, along with being on the bank board, and I had to choose between one or the other within a few years. Another friend of mine was on both boards, and we both had to choose between one or the other, and we both chose to be on the Savings and Loan Board, which was a good choice at the time. And our savings and loan was eventually it was sold and became, and it's part of U.S. Bank now. So it was a long story, but it was kind of Millie and I were married on March 30th, 1947, and we were married at the Hotel Fontanelle, and Rabbi Lou Silverman officiated, and I trying to think of who all my ushers and attendants were. Stuart Simon was my best man, and I think Irv Malashok and Norman Rips and Sid Schwartz and did I mention Norman Smirn, and I think that those were the ushers, and we went to we went to New Orleans on our honeymoon. It was the longest trip I ever took. I think we were gone about 3 weeks. Anyway, we went to New Orleans and saw all the sights there, and Biloxi, Mississippi, and there was some resort there for a few days, and we drove up to Chicago and ended up there, and finally came home to our new little house that we'd bought before we were married, and it was all ready for us, and our life began. I was, as I'd mentioned, Council Bluffs had about quite a Jewish community. My dad had been active in B'nai B'rith, so all the young guys joined B'nai B'rith, and I was would go to B'nai B'rith meetings, and once we had them about, I think they every 2 weeks back in those days, which was evening meetings, not meals, but evening meetings, and that eventually died into once a month, and I was in the Sertoma Club, which was a lot of the young fellas in Council Bluffs. It was joined at the time, and we had a lot of fun, a lot of social life in that, and active in different business groups, and Kay was, as I mentioned, was born in 1949, and John was born on March 28th of 1952. So at that time, we had a 2-bedroom house, and we had to decide what to do. So the summer of 1952, or the spring of 52, I think it was, that we decided to build a new home. And so we built a home at 326 Kenmore in Council Bluffs. It was a new addition, and it was while the house was being built, they paved the street in front of the house, but Betty and Cy Lee, they built next door to us, and several other Jewish families built around us. Although we weren't particularly social friends with them, we were very friendly with them, and our kids were all very friendly. Ended up that within that little area was Leonard Finkel and his sons, and the Sobalski family, Selwyn and his kids were friends of my son, and the Kenny Sachs eventually moved around the corner. I'm just mentioning a few of the Jewish people. Ted Selden lived there for a while before he moved to Omaha. I think that eventually every one of us moved to Omaha, which was something that Millie wanted to do. Apparently all of her life, she never really liked Council Bluffs. Coming from Hastings, Council Bluffs was not a big improvement for her, I guess. Anyway, I didn't realize it until many years later that I knew that we always talked about it, but our social life was in Omaha a lot, but it was interesting that we finally moved at the same time Betty did, and we moved within a few doors of each other down at in 1971, down at the apartments in Regency, within a very short, just right in the same block, you might say. So we were continued to be neighbors. Anyway, getting back to in Council Bluffs, I was one of the first men there to be asked to be on the board of the Jenny Edmondson Hospital. The Jenny Edmondson Hospital was run by the Women's Christian Association. These were a lot of women who would have lunch and ran a hospital back in those days, entirely different than hospitals are run today, and they decided they wanted to go on a big building spree, apparently, or build onto it, and so they needed some men, and so I was one of the 4 men that they asked to be on the board with the women, which was quite an experience. And we did build a new hospital. We built a new big wing onto it, rather than we had to make a decision whether to tear down the old one and to build, and we decided that the best way at the time was to go ahead and add on to that one, although since then they've added on many times, and I think the oldest section is probably all torn down now, so, but it's still in the same location. But it was a interesting experience for me, and I was on that board until I was asked to go on to a board that Governor Hughes in Iowa appointed to a social service board, and it would have conflicted with being on a board of the hospital at the time, and so I had to resign my being on the hospital board to go on the board of the social service board in Iowa, which was over the penitentiaries and all the social services. But it changed a great deal after that, and Governor Hughes and I was on that for less than a year, because when Governor Hughes's term was up and the Republicans got in, they did away with our whole board, because we hadn't been approved of yet, because the legislature only met every 2 years, and we hadn't been approved. So the new governor appointed an entirely different board, which was okay with me, because we were getting ready to move to Omaha anyway, and I wouldn't have been able to. But it was an interesting experience for as long as I was there. I got onto the board and because I was a Republican, and I was Jewish, and I was from southwestern Iowa. And so this friend of mine in Council Bluffs, who is a Democrat, his name was Everett Shockey, and they needed to get a Republican on it, and they needed a Jewish person on the board apparently, and so he literally talked me into going on that board, which I was pleased to do, when I first went there, there was a 5-person board, and we had this meeting, and there was 4 of us there, and there was me, and there was a Democrat lady from. There was going to be 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans, because even though I was not a party, was not an active party person, and I still was a registered Republican. The person living up in northwest Iowa, I think she was from Spencer, and she was a very active Democrat. And then there was a black person from Des Moines who worked for the Better Homes and Garden magazine. He was a labor person, and he was black, as I mentioned. And there was a Republican minister from, I think, Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and me. And so when I got home, I told Millie, I says, well, there was only 4 of us there. I says, there was 1 person missing. I says, we were missing someone from Cedar Rapids or Dubuque, probably Cedar Rapids. That would have been in that part of the state. And I said, Catholic and a lawyer. Sure enough, the very next time, that's who was there. It was a Catholic lawyer from Cedar Rapids. But that's how interesting it was to me to find how they pick a Jewish Republican that they needed in southwestern Iowa that couldn't do them any harm, and then the rest of it was some strategic person, and this is how boards are made up. Anyway, it lasted a short time, and then the new governor was a Republican, and he appointed Mike Albert's father from Sioux City. Mike Alberts was at the time a county commissioner here, I believe, or at least he was a very active person. Anyway, his father was, and so he was appointed, and then the board, and I lost track of it, and I had no interest in it. We moved to Omaha then in 1971 anyway, but I mean, so he called me. He didn't know who I was, but he called me and told me that he was being appointed, and he wanted to know what it was all about. And he told me that he knew my sister Ray. He had known her for years, and that's what that was. But anyway, it was getting back to before I was on that in the hospital, and we built this new hospital, and we had a fundraising, a big fundraiser, and this we'd hired a fundraising firm out of New York, and a Jewish guy, smooth guy, he from Israel comes, and he immediately comes to see me, and we entertained him, and he and his wife were very nice people, and he was there for several months, and became a good friend with him. Overnight he was gone. They replaced him. This is how raising companies do it anyway, and I don't remember whether they sent in someone else, but we finally struggled through and got the hospital built, and it went on from there. Then through the years, I had some nice things happen to me, and in Council Bluffs, I say that I was active in various organizations and the Junior Chamber of Commerce awarded me an outstanding award for when I was about 34 years old of the year, and it's strictly something that you do certain things and you reach a certain thing and they have to pick someone, and I say so they did pick me, but that was something else. Then we had there's starting to be talk of urban renewal. The years went through, and my kids were in high school, and Kay was a sophomore, and she all of a sudden wanted to. They had gone to Temple Israel through Sunday school. They were confirmed there, and they had wanted to go to school in Omaha. Kay they talked about moving to Omaha, and she thought that she would like to go to Central. And so we paid the tuition, and Kay went to her junior and senior year, I think it was her junior and senior year, she transferred and went to Central, which was fine with us. As a matter of fact, our next door neighbor, Dale Ball, his daughter went to Central also. Both his daughter and his son, I don't know why he did. He'd moved in from Fremont, became president of the First National Bank in Council Bluffs, and his kids were going to Central, and that isn't the reason Kay wanted to go to Central. It was just a coincidence. So it was easy for, I even drove him to school a lot. We didn't let Kay. And then John he was in the 8th grade. He finished the 8th grade, and he was going to be a freshman. I says, John, if you want to start Central, it's okay. And so he went all 4 years to Central, and he was active in one of the AZA chapters and different things. Kay was very active in Nifty at Temple. And then we had urban renewal. We was starting to talk about urban renewal, and they were going to do away with downtown Council Bluffs.